Okay, let's jump right into this explainer. We're going to unpack something super fascinating and honestly kind of uncomfortable: the psychological complexities of the sun in the fifth house parenting placement. Now, if you're already into astrology, you know the fifth house is all about creativity and children. But when the sun, which is our core ego, right? When it sits here, the parent-child dynamic gets intensely magnified. We're dealing with what's called the solar parent. This is where a parent's personal legacy and their own ego become dangerously tied up in their kid's life.
So it brings up a really heavy question. What actually happens when your child's success threatens your own ego? We have to start by looking at a tough truth that, let's be real, very few people ever want to admit out loud. You might be someone who takes absolutely massive pride in your kid's achievements. You're the one cheering the loudest from the sidelines. But what happens in those quiet moments when they start getting a little more attention or more admiration than you do? There can be this sudden, jarring feeling of unease. So let's untangle exactly why that psychological trigger happens.
At its core, the tension comes from this really deep-seated pride that accidentally creates a subtle but super powerful competition between generations. Think about it. The sun represents our fundamental need to shine. So a parent with this placement naturally projects their own light right onto their child. But when that kid starts generating their own brilliant light, the parent's ego can unconsciously start feeling like, well, maybe there just isn't enough room in the sky for two suns.
Moving into Section 1, the shadow of pride, when celebration becomes uncomfortable.
This dynamic creates a crazy internal tug of war. On one hand, you've got this immense, totally genuine pride in their achievements. You truly, deeply want them to succeed. But at the exact same time, there's this secret discomfort with their growing recognition. You feel so much joy for their excellence, but you're also struggling with feeling overshadowed by that very same success. It's like you want them to win, for sure, but you really don't want to lose your own status as the star of the family.
And we usually see this play out when parents unconsciously start measuring their kids' progress against their own past experiences. It's that classic when I was your age mentality, but completely amplified by the ego. Like, if you made varsity at 15 and they're struggling on JV, the ego flares up. Instead of just letting the kids' achievements exist on their own, they're constantly weighed against the parent's life resume. And that totally stops the parent from just celebrating the kid for exactly who they are.
Which brings us to Section 2, generational ego battles, when disagreements escalate.
As kids grow up, they naturally start developing some independence. So, step 1, they question authority or decision. That is completely normal behavior. But then we hit step 2. The solar parent feels incredibly challenged. The kid's growing confidence literally feels like a direct threat. And boom, we're in the danger zone, step 3. Suddenly, the disagreement isn't even about the original situation anymore. It turns into this massive ego battle over who is right, and the actual problem just gets totally forgotten in a contest for dominance.
What started as an everyday interaction transforms into this silent, unspoken rivalry. Both sides are just desperately seeking recognition and influence. In real life, this usually looks like someone constantly needing the final word. The parent feels this overwhelming urge to have the absolute final say, not because their idea is actually better, but because yielding to their child feels like stepping down from the throne.
Let's flip the perspective in Section 3, the weight of expectations, the child's reality.
Honestly, being the child of a solar parent is an incredibly heavy burden to carry. First off, there's this intense expectation that the child needs to perfectly reflect the parent's values and talents. They aren't really given the space to just be themselves. That creates crushing pressure to constantly earn approval. And the most heartbreaking part, it leads the child to believe that love is entirely conditional. They basically learn to tie their entire self-worth directly to their performance.
Now, the parent usually believes they're just pushing the kid toward excellence, but kids are super perceptive, right? They really struggle to separate pure, genuine encouragement from a parent who's just trying to validate their own legacy. The kid starts to wonder, wait, are you pushing me because it's good for me, or just because my spelling bee trophy is going to look really awesome on your mantle? That blurred line creates some deep, deep resentment over time.
So how do we fix it? That's Section 4, the ultimate lesson, true parental leadership.
Breaking this cycle starts with the absolutely greatest lesson of the fifth house placement. You have to recognize that your kids are not your competitors, and they definitely aren't just extensions of your own personal pride. Untangling your ego from your child's identity is literally some of the hardest yet most liberating work you can do as a parent. It takes a ton of self-awareness to catch yourself when you're making their life all about you.
There's this quote that just hits the nail on the head.
True leadership comes from helping them shine without needing to stand in their light. Wow. Just let that sink in for a second. That is the ultimate shift right there, moving from an ego-driven rivalry to selfless, empowering guidance. Your job isn't to be the sun that outshines them. Your job is to give them the warmth and the space they need to ignite their own star, even if, actually, scratch that, especially if it ends up outshining yours.
Because at the end of the day, conflicts are gonna happen. Your kid is probably gonna choose a path that completely rejects your talents or your values to find their own. And when that moment hits, you're faced with a huge choice. Are you gonna choose control and try to force them back into your shadow? Or will you choose acceptance and step out of the way so they can truly shine? How you answer that is what really defines your legacy. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer. Take a little time today to think about whose light you might be standing in.